Welcome, everyone, to Solutions and Resources for University Renewable Energy Procurement. Thanks for joining us today. This webinar is brought to you by Second Nature in partnership with the Business Renewables Center at the Rocky Mountain Institute. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording and slides will be sent to all registrants in the days following the webinar. There'll be a question and answer session at the end, so you can submit questions for the Q&A at any time using the questions function on the GoToWebinar panel. And we look forward to hearing your questions. Right now, we at Second Nature are working very hard on providing more resources to help signatories meet their climate goals. Next, we can show. The presenters today are Mark Porter. He's a manager at the Business Renewables Center. Megan Chappell, who's the Director of Office of Sustainability at the George Washington University, and myself, Jana Cohen-Rosenthal. I'm the Climate Programs Director at Second Nature. Next. We get support from our corporate sponsors at Second Nature to do these webinars. You can learn more on our website. Next. So the main program that we work on are called the President's Climate Leadership Commitments. And many of you attending the webinar today are signatory institutions or partners that help support signatory institutions. The climate commitment and the carbon commitment entail a campus becoming 100% carbon neutral, which means really radically changing the way we use energy and often using 100% renewable energy for electricity and for other energy sources. So our guests today are going to talk about how their institutions support and achieve those goals. So next. The Climate Leadership Network is comprised of over 600 institutions who are reaching these goals. They have to submit annual reports on their efforts. And our new reporting platform was launched in January. And it has some really great features where you can filter and see progress made by signatory institutions. The icon here shows you which institutions are climate commitment or carbon commitment, and also the resilience commitment. You can also filter on the amount of renewable energy used, and in the future we hope to offer more filtering options, more ability to understand the amount of renewable energy being used by institution. Next. We also provide resources on our website at secondnature.org. There's a wonderful document called the Climate Guidance, a Campus Sustainability Planning Action Guide, and it has a depth of resources. Next. So that's it for Second Nature. We really look forward to hearing from Mark Porter at Business Renewables Center. And after that, we'll go Megan, and then we'll have time at the very end for questions. So Mark, please start your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Jana. It's a pleasure to be speaking with everybody today. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. I wanted to start off with showing a familiar story, which is really showing one side of the industry. This chart here is showing the corporate transactions, those companies that have completed and procured renewable energy projects via PPAs. This is looking at additional projects. So all of the transactions you see on here are companies stimulating new renewable energy capacity, new carbon-free generation. This has typically attracted a lot of press, and I thought I'd start here and pause on some of the whys. So you see that there are many recognizable household names and common brands. Many of these companies on here are members of the Business Renewables Center, the BRC. They have joined the membership and they have undertaken these transactions to meet sustainability aims. Many of the earlier players, the initial players, especially in the IT sector, felt like they have been, or they are, building out the infrastructure to move our society through the next era of economic growth. As the long-distance transmission lines were for electricity to propel our society forward, their view is the IT and the internet infrastructure is exactly the same thing for our next economic push. and they wanted to leave a good legacy. They wanted to leave a legacy that is sustainable and ultimately lasts that test of time. Those early pioneers into the space have really forged a pathway, allowing many more other organizations who are seeking a broader array of interests to undertake transactions and move down this path towards a greater level of sustainability. Next slide, please. Important thing to note is that it's not just corporations that have undertaken these transactions. The higher ed sector is to me very active, and you can see here a list of all the participants who have done transactions so far. And the important thing I feel here is that the higher education sector and institutions are absolutely competing on the same level as all of their corporate peers. I think that this shows that this sector is not, is no longer just the purview of the IT partners. Clearly they have a fair amount of capacity they've procured, but looking across the increasingly broad range of other participants, it's definitely an open game. Next slide, please. One of the things that we do at the Business Renewables Center is help to connect buyers and help provide access to resources to enable buyers to make informed decisions. Ultimately, we're very passionate about additional carbon-free generation being added to our electricity grid. That being said, we'd always rather see an entity, an organization make the appropriate choice, make an informed choice. So this chart here, that hopefully everyone can see the bars and the names on the chart, shows that there are many other higher educational peers who have been through this process, and there is a wealth and a treasure trove of knowledge and experience to support other buyers interested in looking at this space. One of the things that I've been with the Business Renewables Center for about a year now, just over, and one of the things I have been consistently and repeatedly warmed by is the willingness for buyers to chat with other buyers, experienced buyers, to work and talk with other buyers going through their journey, to help offer pearls of wisdom and advice and perspectives on specific issues, whatever they might be. This chart here really illustrates that nobody is alone when they come to look at this. Nobody is doing this for the first time, and there are tools and resources, and I think also importantly people out there who very much can support you through that journey. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So perhaps quickly and moving down that path of what tools and resources do you have out there. The Business Renewables Center has I would say kind of three large areas of resource. I guess underpinning all of that, the three legs of the stool is the ability and the kind of a regular activity that we do is to connect buyers, and that we feel that everyone in those conversations always benefit. I've never yet had a conversation where someone felt they were only giving or only receiving, which is always very good. The first kind of larger bucket, if you will, of resource is our information portal. And this is very much a library of tools and resources, the codification of best practices, if you will, that just sits there and acts as a constant permanent resource for buyers just as they move through their internal process, as they're working to negotiate a transaction. This is here constantly. So we have, a series of more kind of, technical primers and guides dealing with various different topics. Risk allocation and aggregation you see there are just two. Templates, giving buyers an understanding of where to start when seeking to run an RFP for developer partners, or looking what are the heads of terms, what are the terms that come in one of these PPAs, so I can work with my internal stakeholders around getting comfortable with them in advance. Case studies, absolutely, that is, diving very deeply into specific deals, just to help share that knowledge and learning. I think the last point that is a core area of what we're doing, which is less a written resource, although we draw on it clearly, are the boot camps. And these are essentially 2.5, 3-day training sessions where buyers come, and it's buyers working with buyers. So we are there as a BRC to chaperone and facilitate the event. We typically have small, up to say 16 or 20 buyers in the room as attendees, as students, if you will. And then our faculty are all experienced buyers, of which we typically have about half a dozen. And we have, when we are running one in June, this is a series that we are repeating, as we find that both the value in learning, taking somebody from walking into the room knowing almost nothing about the electricity system, walking out of the room knowing what are the core component parts of procuring renewable energy, is one, and clearly a large side of that. Another side is the social or bonding time that you get from sitting down with 3 days with a group of people who are in the same space and sector and same mindset as you. All very good. I'm going to move on, though, conscious of time. Can we have the next slide, please? The next area we have is an electronic platform. So we've called this the BRC Marketplace. And we use this tool, and buyers use this tool when they are actually at all stages through the transaction. And it is essentially presents buyers with, we currently have about 23 gigawatts of contractable capacity. We know that it is contractable because we place quite heavy limits around the developers who show those projects, in essence, forcing them to self-select their best projects. As a buyer, clearly we understand that there are, most developers have a pipeline of projects, tens if not hundreds of projects deep. As a buyer, we are able to make a request to the developer community, essentially reaching into that broader pipeline, that deeper pipeline, and asking, well, I see what you're showing us here, thank you, but I also want to know specifically about projects in location X or with criteria Y and Z. And it enables that kind of two-way communication without necessarily having to be hard sold, without necessarily having to show who you are, so you can keep your transactional powder dry, as it were. It enables buyers to ask questions of the sector, ask questions of those who are out there developing these projects. So if you have a specific interest in an area, you can make a project request in that area and ask questions. And the litany goes on. But that, and also, I think the last thing is this platform. Each of the service providers on the developer side, as well as on our intermediary side, upload and kind of show their company CV. And that enables buyers just to get a handle on who is out there and what do they do, because that can be sometimes quite a confusing view. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So the last area that we are currently working on is this economic analysis tool, and we feel that this is a very, very important area in our view, is understanding where should I undertake my transaction. And the principle behind this is to compare the last 12 months average cost of electricity at a specific node with the overnight cost of a renewable energy project, typically wind or solar. And the theory being that as a buyer, I need to understand what is the average revenue, effectively, the renewable energy project would receive, and what is the cost from that project. If there is a large surplus, profit or income over expenditure, then there is room to negotiate a transaction with a developer, and that enables a more tailored risk allocation within a contract, which of course impacts price. If, however, you have a situation where the cost of the renewable energy project is, let's say, $20 a megawatt hour, and the price coming off the market is, let's say, $15 a megawatt hour, that -5 does not give much room for negotiation to enable a fair and appropriate allocation of risk between the parties. So this tool, which should be launched probably by the end of this month, maybe in very early June at the latest, is our first step to helping buyers and sellers ultimately understand where are good locations for projects, and what are we thinking when we start to put some numbers around these actual projects themselves. Next slide, please, which I think brings me to the end of my session, and I can now hand over to Megan. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Megan Chappell. I just want to make sure folks can hear me. If you can't, please let us know. Thanks, Mark. That was great and definitely set me up for a little deeper dive. Next slide. I'm the Director of Sustainability here at George Washington University, and we launched into this idea of a large-scale renewable purchase several years ago and closed our deal in 2014. This year, calendar year 2017, has been our first full operational year. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the project. Next slide, please. The reason we decided to look at large-scale renewable energy may be very similar to why a lot of higher ed institutions are looking to the solution. This, of course, is our carbon footprint and our neutrality pathway. And you'll see the blue wedge is building energy efficiency. GW is in the heart of Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from the White House. And so we're an urban campus, and buildings were and continue to be the biggest part of our footprint. So we focused a lot of efforts on addressing energy efficiency there, reducing our footprint. Transportation, as you can see, is a very small slice of our pie. It's the little yellow line, the little yellow slice wedge. And that's because we're so well connected to different modes of transportation as well as people just walking around town. Even a smaller slice for what we can do on campus, given the area and footprint of our campus, there's probably less than 5% of our electricity needs could be met if we plastered our rooftops with solar panels, for example, and that's not even possible given some of the structural and equipment requirements on our rooftops. So that left us with the rest of the emissions, and we were really looking to the grid to change the way it's providing electricity. And we're finding when we had conversations with our electric providers through the grid that they didn't have great solutions for us. We eventually had some really enlightening conversations with friends at World Resources Institute and then Customer First Renewables to get to this concept of large-scale renewables. And the University of Maryland had also done something similar through the state, and that inspired us to look into this concept of off-site renewable energy. Next slide. And the result has been a project that we have commissioned with a developer for 20 years. And it's off-site, but it is in the grid within which GW sits. It's called the PJM grid, if you're familiar with the different ISOs, the service areas within the U.S. grid. This is an area that has a little cutout in North Carolina, includes Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and goes west, even with little bits reaching to Ohio. So we really wanted to prioritize putting a project within our own grid so that we could create what's called a direct line of sight to the project through our retail electric supplier, which I can talk more about later. But the result is in this picture, and this is a picture of one of 3 sites that we built, and that our developer built, I should say, and it totals about 400 acres, and it covers the electricity needs for the 3 buying partners. That would be GW, American University, and the George Washington University Hospital. So the important thing about our model is that we did this as an aggregation with multiple buyers together. Next slide. This gives you a little more detail about the partners and the purchase and a map of where the 3 sites are in northeastern North Carolina. And the reason that we aggregated our load together as 3 buyers was because we were looking for the economies of scale. And this deal was done at a time when there were very few deals out there and less transparency around what scale was necessary to get economics that would work. And we actually put out a bid for purchase for developers in partnership with the George Washington University, obviously, American University, and the District of Columbia municipality. And the reason I want to bring that up is so that as you're thinking about making purchases, if you are looking for scale, you can get creative about what kinds of partners you work with, which is what we did. When we put out our bid for projects, we got a response from 28 different developers, and they were able to provide us data that would allow us to compare apples to apples. And that's why an RFP process is really important. And at that time, once we saw the results, we decided that American University and the George Washington University and the George Washington University Hospital would make a purchase together, and that the District of Columbia government would make a purchase on their own. They had enough scale to do it on their own. So this led to what's called the Capital Partner Solar Project, and it is covering a 50% load through a power purchase agreement. Each partner signed a separate agreement with the developer, though the agreements mirrored one another. And we do receive the renewable energy certificates from this project. The developer is Duke Energy Renewables, and the advisor who really helped us the whole way and was the architect behind our deal was Customer First Renewables. Next slide. So this is just a summary of some of the challenges we faced and the solutions that we came up with. Rocky Mountain Institute's Business Renewables Center and the resources that are there were very much under development at this time. And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. I just recall there were some resources available, but now the resources that are there are much more robust. And some of these challenges are well documented on their site, and some of their cases and resources are there to address some of these challenges. So this is a summary quickly. Because we were doing an aggregation, there were a lot of different viewpoints on what defines success across the 3 different organizations. And in order to overcome those disparate views, it was really important for us to have clear data, like I mentioned before, comparing apples to apples, that included the PPA cost, current electricity prices, as well as other costs in buying electricity, such as capacity and transmission and other components that you may or may not be aware of as an institution that you're paying. So we really were focused on the objective, transparent, and fact-based process. That came in as well as helpful when we were looking at the lack of market transparency. A lot of our retail suppliers and of the 3 buying entities hadn't shared as much data with those of us who were buying until we asked for it through this process. And that required us to bring in some experienced external support. As a higher education institution, you may not have a really deep bench. You may, or you may not have a really deep bench on how the electricity purchases happen and the different components of your electricity purchase. But that was something that we got external support for through Customer First Renewables. The next thing was around building internal understanding and confidence. This was an effort that was really led by the various offices of sustainability, where we each worked with our respective CFOs, budget teams, energy teams, legal teams, and communications and public relations teams, and also our finance teams who dealt with the accounting issues, as well as how to present this on our balance sheet. And the benefits of being in a partnership with another university and the hospital really did help the peers in each institution share knowledge as well. So the CFOs, for example, between the 3 buyers often talked to one another and shared their concerns and also shared their solutions with one another, which helped keep the ball moving forward and built confidence around this very new concept of how to purchase energy. The next item is around the long-term nature of this. Our project is for a 20-year contract, and the previous way the university had been purchasing energy was in anywhere between 1 and 5 year time periods. So we realized this wasn't just a standard RFP or procurement process, and that's also a reason that we brought in external support to help us develop the RFP. and our procurement team was obviously involved with that as well. And then once the project came to life, and by that I mean once we landed on a developer that would work, and once we signed the contract, we then were able to start creating awareness among our stakeholders about the benefits of the project as well as the economic value. So we as buyers joined forces together to promote the project and had consistent messaging and consistent branding, which led to this name of the Capital Partner Solar Project. And we put out press releases, and in 2014 it was a really high media hit for the universities externally. We also worked with our developer to create academic and research programs. We have a living laboratory class that we are in the Office of Sustainability here at GW co-teaching with our faculty in the School of Engineering, whereby our students go to the site in North Carolina, work with the developer, and do a study on the site. And I believe American University has a course that focuses on this as well. And the other thing we're working on now is an on-site display on campus. Since, as you know, students graduate every year, it's important to build something on site that helps students who aren't seeing the off-site display, they aren't seeing the off-site construction, that they can get a sense of what's really happening, that 50% of the electricity at their university is supplied by a solar farm. And then we continue to manage the project on a long-term basis, and it's now integrated into our energy management system. And in order to do that, we continue to work with external experts at the retail electric level as well as the strategic level. Next slide. Okay, so I will hand it off now, and I believe we're going back to Brett. I'm not quite sure who's next. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you. This is Jana. Megan, thank you very much. Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful overview of your project. It's very exciting. Mark, thank you for talking about the BRC, and I want to let signatories know how they can access the resources there. You can go to our website, secondnature.org, and you click on initiatives and find the BRC, and there's a form where you can fill out and you can be granted access to the BRC. So I don't want to forget that important step. You can also email us at commitments@secondnature.org, and we can help direct you. So that was a wonderful overview about large-scale renewable energy purchases and how to get resources to do them. I know I worked on a campus, and we did a smallish on-campus solar PPA, and the process to do one of these projects is quite different, and the financials and the reality have changed considerably every year, every few months. So our first question is directed to Megan. Who should be the first people you talk to on campus if you want to do a large-scale renewable energy purchase?
That's a great question. I guess it depends on who is asking the question. If it's someone within the energy team or the facilities team, I would say the first person you want to talk to is your CFO or your finance team in terms of educating them around how you want to shift your energy purchasing and how this might affect your pricing going forward. If it's the Office of Sustainability that's starting the conversation, I would say the first people you need to speak with are your facilities and energy team, and then bring in the finance folks. The idea being that while there are financial benefits to doing this, usually we are finding, and this is certainly what happened here at GW, as well as with our other partners, the conversation started as a carbon reduction conversation, not necessarily a cost savings conversation.
Mark, what have you found to be successful? Who's accessing resources from the BRC, and where are they bringing them in their organizations to be successful?
Thank you, Jana. I would actually agree with Megan wholeheartedly in terms of the first key stakeholders. We find that our kind of principal contacts who are close to our membership are typically drawing on our resources to have multiple conversations with the stakeholders or whoever they are. And through conversations with buyers and market participants, that internal process, I think the importance of that can't be underestimated. And in all parts of the transactional process, that is the one that has to be right and is the trickiest one. and the view to kind of winning the hearts and minds of your peers and stakeholders is absolutely critical. So I think Megan's point around approaching the finance team and the CFO, because ultimately these projects can have a sizable dollar number if they're depending on how they're structured, et cetera, and that in the conversation will go through finance. So making sure that you are the institution's goals and objectives are aligned with the financial processes and policies is a key first step, I would say.
Great. So we have a question from the audience, two questions about utilities. So the first question, for either of you, do you have resources, suggestions for working with, I think in states where there's regulated utilities, there's not competition with the public utility in providing renewable, allowing large-scale renewable energy purchases. And to Megan, maybe just clarify to at the outset the role your utility played in this type of project.
Sure, and I will venture to say that I am not an expert on utility dynamics. So let me start with that, qualify with that. We are in a deregulated market, and so we have retail choice. The university has retail choice. So the utility hasn't been closely involved. A player that we learned needed to be involved with a retail electric supplier, and that's something that I wasn't aware that the university even had a relationship with a retail electric supplier until we got into this project. But the idea being that a retail electric supplier helps us manage our load and helps us purchase electricity at the right quantity at the right time. And so we have worked closely with them. I think Mark can probably answer this better than I, but these projects are doable in regulated states as well.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, I would a slightly qualified yes. So if somebody is in an area with a deregulated wholesale market, then these transactions are eminently possible. If you're an institution and you're in a fully structured, organized, regulated market, then typically, the utility then has to be involved, usually by law. And what's possible is to undertake what's known as a sleeved transaction. And without getting exceptionally technical on the call here, the energy is passed through the utility to the buyer down an imaginary tunnel, such that the broader rate base is not subsidizing the energy the buyer is choosing to procure. It's a little bit more technical than as I'm describing it, but that is certainly possible. It typically comes down to the local utilities, or kind of the utility in your service area, and how geared up and able they are to kind of undertake this sort of transaction. Typically, the utility will always be looking to the regulator to make sure that's possible. So it can be one step removed from the actual utility itself. I would make a point that the BRC works with 3 other NGOs in a consortium known as the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, and our partners at WWF and WRI, as Megan was indicating, do a lot of work with regulated utilities. So they're an excellent resource to start that conversation off. Equally as well, looking at that deal tracker and working out who has worked on transactions in those regulated spaces that are around where you are can also be a very useful first step in just trying to understand the landscape. Most utilities and utility service areas have a level of uniqueness to them, given the way that the regulations have evolved differently in different places. So, to my understanding, no one size fits all, but there are some lessons that can be learned for sure.
Wonderful. So I just want to remind everyone you can submit questions on the questions pane in the GoToWebinar pane. So, we have gotten a lot of questions around cost. So, Megan, and I also just want to hear how you address this question at both GW and Mark with your stakeholders. So Megan, can you speak a little bit more on the details of the costs involved with this project? And we can kind of go from there.
And you're referring to the academic class?
Well, I'm sorry, the costs. So we've been getting
the cost. Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all about the money here. So people are asking,
okay,
money.
Forget this education piece. Let's just cut to
I
know. So sure, the cost, like I mentioned before, this pitch came to the leadership of the university as a carbon reduction initiative. And this may be the case with many of you on the phone or watching this webinar. Those of us in sustainability operations aren't given banks and banks of money to spend. We usually have to make the case as to how this saves money or makes money. And that's just testament to how sustainability makes things work more effectively and efficiently in the broader system. So that's the approach we really took, even though this was a carbon reduction initiative primarily. We couldn't have gotten this project over the finish line unless it addressed cost. And our initial projections were based on a very conservative scenario of brown power electricity prices increasing, and that we also had sort of a worst case scenario where brown power electricity prices would decline. And the reason it was important to consider the brown power is we were comparing what's the cost or the delta, if you will, if you were to lock in a price for your green power for 20 years. How would that compare to the changes in brown power over time? And effectively, the argument that we made was one that was very likely, though not certain, but very likely that the university would save significant amount of money over that 20-year period. We also were certain that there would be price certainty over that 20-year period, which would allow for the university to plan effectively, relatively, I think, 15 to 20% of its budget with certainty, given that a portion of its energy budget, let's put it that way. So if the energy budget is 15 to 20% of the overall spend of the university, there was some portion of that they could plan with certainty over the next 20 years. So the certainty and the likelihood of savings over time were the two cost drivers that really brought this over the finish line.
Meg, I would add in there that Megan is absolutely right. The ability to use these contracts or transactions to bring in an element of long-term price management or price certainty, which is otherwise unavailable for electricity costs. You can't really lock in your electricity costs for more than a couple of years, maybe 3 years, without paying absolutely through the nose for it. That's what these transactions are. That's the real value in these transactions, and that business certainty, that planning certainty that it enables organisations, and we hear that from members and our stakeholders all the time, all the time.
And what kind of resources should we send people to look for how to talk about risk management or how to present this business case to those who might not be coming at it from a carbon savings perspective?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, and Megan, I can jump in here and then please jump in as well also. We have I would first pause on that slide I had around our kind of our information portal, that library. So there was an economic analysis primer, we have a deal structure primer, and those two are kind of some of the first readings I often recommend for new buyers who are considering this, and it just lays out in a pretty decent level of detail all kind of the component parts around these transactions. We're not trying to teach project finance modeling here, but certainly to give everyone a handle as to how actually these projects can be looked at. I think the second thing I'd say would be to have a look at the term sheet template, just to give you a sense of where you're headed. I think it's important to understand the end goal, and then the next thing I would suggest to buyers would be to start looking at things like the risk allocation primer, because clearly kind of where you are now, understanding the landscape and your internal drivers, understanding where you want to be, say as a starting point term sheet. Our next step is to understand how we get there, and really, to me, to us, that really kind of boils down to that risk allocation. Additional training, things like the boot camp, is good. I would certainly recommend that, but I think I'd also recommend speaking with other people, Megan and others who have been through this process and can offer perspectives based on your specific needs and wants and circumstances.
Great. Well, I hope we're impressing to the audience that this is a very exciting opportunity. It clearly is complex, and so the resources, the BRC, are very important. And also Megan talked about how she had been working with an advisor. We got a question from the audience. How do you feel if campuses should be contracting with a firm like Customer First or another advisor, or should they go directly to an RFP for development or procurement?
Do you want me to answer that, or you want?
Yes. Yeah, that would be great.
Sure. So when we started this process back in 2011, maybe 2012, I think it was 2011, there were very few players known to us out there. I would recommend at this point in time that you talk with various different potential advisors, learn what they have to offer. And the nice thing about the Business Renewables Center is they provide a list of various players, so you can start there. As you may have gathered by, for example, the details that Mark was offering previously, there's a lot of different components. When there's the RFP, there's the contract. This takes time, and it takes time in terms of the time in your day, but it also takes time in terms of months, if not years, depending on how fast your university moves. So making a commitment to figure out if this is something you want to do is really important so that you can maintain that commitment throughout the process. It requires some endurance. But talking with some of the advisors who are out there to get started, I think is really helpful. And I would recommend that folks take into consideration there are advisors, there are also brokers who broker deals, and then there are developers. And some of the players in the market now act as wear those multiple hats, either as an advisor, a broker, a developer, one or the other, all three, or two of the three. So understanding their different roles is important, and I would encourage people to lean on experts at the Business Renewables Center to help you get your head around, like, who is an advisor, who is a broker, who is a developer. We did go directly to a developer at one point and found that we weren't getting the best price by doing it that way. So putting out an RFP at some point is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I think I'd echo all of that. The one thing I'd add is of all the buyers we know of two who have not used an advisor, and I know that one of those is interested in doing another deal and is using an advisor because they don't want to go down that again. So I think that's the normal course of business. Just echoing back to a previous point we were talking about around the internal process. And that being kind of a key important step. Many of the advisors can support their client through that process with tools and resources and challenge the deal team in ways of thinking and help put them in the shoes of their internal counterparts and their stakeholders, just to try and ensure the messaging is correct and people can make an informed decision. And that kind of sounding board is a very useful kind of role and part of the deal, part of the services.
Great. So clearly here at Second Nature and the President's Climate Leadership Commitments, we are focused on signatories reaching carbon neutrality. And so that means having a clear and accurate representation of the carbon benefit of the renewable energy purchases. So Megan, you mentioned that you retain the RECs for your project. Can you discuss a little bit how that came to be, why that was the discussion, and what you looked for in making that agreement?
Sure. When we initially started this process, we were, sorry, there's a lot of clanking in the background. If someone could put it on mute. There was a lot of consensus around why we wanted to do the project. Both the District of Columbia government and American University, along with GW, were really committed to addressing carbon reduction. And the question was, how would we go about doing that? There were lots of options out there, such as selling the RECs from the project and swapping them out for other RECs. But given that the stakeholders at a university, the main stakeholders are students, it was really important for the buyers to develop a project that would be easily translatable for the student audience, that they could understand that this was a project that was developed because the universities put out an interest in buying, and also because the universities wanted to reduce their carbon footprint. Point being that that was an intention at the start of the project. And so we wanted to look for projects that hadn't already been developed, but were in the pipeline for development. And we were committed to retaining the RECs from this project so that we could say, this is our project. You can go study our project. You can learn about how our project is changing the way the grid is working. But this project supplies power to George Washington and America.
Great. And Mark, how have you worked with your stakeholders on ensuring the quality of RECs, ensuring additionality of the projects that they're contracting?
Sure. No, thank you. We found that the buyer members of the BRC almost exclusively have wanted high quality additional RECs, and on that marketplace platform that I mentioned, there is the ability for buyers to request or developers to offer, energy and RECs coming from existing plants and operational assets. The reality is that almost all of those, all of the projects, all of that 22 gigawatts are to be built. And the idea and the theory to meet a kind of a high quality REC would be to do exactly what Megan did, and be a signatory, be a key driver in the development of a new asset that is displacing other carbon-based generation.
Great. So that's some clear guidance on this process. Also, I would let signatories know that we just recently published some advice about how to account for your renewable energy purchases. Our new annual progress report, annual progress evaluation has some new questions in it about renewable energy purchases that better align with the new guidance around these things. However, some of the calculators that are used might not reflect that. So please contact, if you ever have any questions about how to report on your renewable energy purchases or how to account for future carbon reductions, just give us an email or a call at Second Nature, and we're happy to help walk through that process, because not understanding how to account for it shouldn't be the reason to go forward with a project. If it's confusing about the carbon offsetting or carbon reductions, not offsetting, we don't want that to prevent a project going forward. So yes, be in touch around that, and we can provide resources or connect you to others who have thought through some of these decisions. As I mentioned, each region is different and has some different needs. So I'd actually just like to ask each of our speakers here to maybe wrap up with what advice they would have, final advice they'd have for institutions who are thinking about pursuing large-scale renewable energy as you've been sort of thinking through these questions. Anything kind of final thoughts, and we'll go from there. So maybe, Megan, can I start with you?
Sure. I would just say don't hesitate at this point. I would say get out there. The market is changing very quickly in terms of new experts and new players, and so there's a real opportunity to take advantage of good pricing with those advisors, because there's a lot of competition coming up right now. And also, the longer that folks wait, I think the more common this will become. So in some ways, that may mean it's easier to do, but I also think there are cost advantages to get in early and do it before it becomes perfectly mainstream.
That's really interesting, Megan, really interesting. Just anecdotally, speaking with a buyer very recently, they were saying how they had actually received slightly better pricing, in kind of 2019 or something than say 2018, and it was a conversation, this year, so 2019, 2020, on the basis that the technology reductions, technology improvements leading to cost reductions were expected to exceed the reduction in tax credits. Again, without getting very complicated and technical on the phone. They were continuing to pursue a deal now because, to Megan's point, this can actually, these transactions can take quite a while, and that was aligned with their goals. So I think my response coming back into Jana's original question is, carefully consider your goals and make sure that it's in congruence with everything else and other things in the institution and the entity that you're working with, which I think is fairly well understood. A tip or a trick would be to try and work with your senior leadership, because the transactions are considerably easier when you have a mandate from the top, as it were. In going forward, I would agree with Megan, don't be scared, be bold, don't be scared, get out there, understand what the market is doing in your location, in your region, and where you can procure. Typically kind of one-on-one meetings are better. One-on-group meetings, I've heard some horror stories as to how badly they can go. So especially when you are socializing the concept, that is quite important and something that we hear often. I'll pause there, but that, definitely asking questions and ensuring that key stakeholders understand what you're even proposing and trying to do is a key first step.
Wonderful. That's good advice, and yes, definitely coming from the President's Climate Leadership Commitments and the network, we think engaging your senior leadership is a wonderful step. Obviously, being prepared with all of this information that you can access through the BRC and looking at case studies like GW, I think is a great way to approach your senior leadership. There's more information about the Capital Solar Partners Project. I believe GW has a wonderful website. We also have some information on ours, and then if you want to access the BRC, don't forget to be in touch with me or fill out that form. Mark, there's no time limit or a time frame to be a participant, right? You can just access it at any time over the next few months, or?
Absolutely. We don't have any requirements on buyers. You can sign up and become a member, and then we like it if people talk to us. But ultimately, if you sign up a member and then never use it, you've just signed an MOU, nothing more. There's no stipulation around that, and there's no time bar or anything on when people sign to when people use resources, how they use them. It's all the tools and resources are there for people to use as they need. Perfect.
So yes, this is a great resource and a benefit for being a signatory. I believe corporate partners, have additional fee for these great resources. So we're happy to have this partnership to spread renewable energy and large-scale renewable energy purchases in the higher education sector. So I just want to remind the audience that the slides and the recording will be sent to them in a few days. Definitely feel free to pass on this resources to others at your institution, and feel free to be in touch with myself. And good luck meeting your carbon neutrality goals with large-scale renewable energy. And thanks again to our speakers. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.